with this in mind, I'm very happy to bring Joey on stage. Joey, still around?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. How are you all
Joey's-
doing today?
Joey's always around, always around. Now, Joey, in a good way, in a good way. Now, Joey has been working with big and small companies and spent, I don't know, 15 to 20 years doing this, design, UX, digital. And so I'm very, very happy to always listen to what Joey has to say. And I know a couple of really interesting things about Joey. One of them is that Joey is exactly 1% Mongolian.
Yeah.
We'll probably talk about it a little bit later. And he also shared a sauna with Meatloaf, not the food, the singer. I can't wait to hear that story. But before that
story, definitely. I'm sure I'll get there.
Excellent. But before that, I'm going to stop talking and let Joey do the talking. He's much better at this than I am. Joey, take it away.
Hello,
and please, everyone, just before Joey starts, give just a little clap emoji to Joey. So
thank you, everybody. Hello.
Nicer. Joey, off you go.
Good to see you all. Hello, everybody. So V gave me a little bit of my background. So my background is I studied neuroscience and cognitive psychology and neuroscience. And then I also have a master's degree in human-computer interaction. So I can talk about these things from an academic point of view, but I also have about 15, 16 years worth of practical experience running large-scale UX projects for people and relaunches for people like Marriott, Disney, eBay, the train line in the UK, people like that as well. So I've got a lot of experience across a lot of broad consumer brands. And more recently, I spend a lot of my time coaching product teams, product managers, product teams to do better work. And a big part of that is helping them review and understand and supercharge their products. And so what we're going to look at today is that intersection of product management, business, UX, and design to make some really practical changes to the PowerCoders site that you can also use to supercharge any of the websites you're working on. So I'll give you all of my insight, tips, and tricks to do great work. I'll also share with you like a full, huge article that I've been updating for most of my career, it feels like, on how to do a UX review. So this is like the Bible of how I do a review of the UX of a website, all the questions I ask, all of the things that I do, and I'll be walking you through some of that today. I'm also at some point going to roll my sleeves up and do a little bit of design work. I'm not a designer. I can wireframe, but please do forgive me if you're all designers out there, because I'm not a pure designer. If any of you saw me speak at Smashing Conf in Toronto a few years ago, design's not my strength. Dan Moore was really sweet to me afterwards, but yeah, you could definitely spot that I wasn't a designer. So if we're all ready, then we'll dive in. And what I'm going to be doing today is Bettina, who's from PowerCoders, is here. And so anytime I like to do a UX review, you can do it independently from afar, but always the best thing to do is to ask, honestly, the right questions. And if you want to be good at UX, it's not about having all the right answers. So it's not like having a million tips to do this, that, and the other. It's all about having the right questions to understand, is to get to the root of what's going on. And you ask those questions not only to users, obviously you ask questions to users, but you also ask questions to the business as well, the organization behind it, to get the answers that can help you understand how and what to improve as we go through. All right, so if that sounds good for everybody, that's what I'm going to start to do, is to start looking at some of these questions. Okay. All right, let's go. I'm going to try and share a screen now. Hopefully this will work. Where's my share screen button? Can you, it's crossed out, not my entire screen, an application window. Okay, I'm going to start sharing this one. Can you see that? Yes, you can. Brilliant. Great stuff. So this is the PowerCoders website. Great stuff. I love it. Okay, so I'm going to, as I mentioned, I'm going to walk you through basically this article here, which is my definitive guide on how to do a UX review. And I've been updating this for years. Okay. I've dropped it in the chat there. So anytime I mention anything, I will drop it in the chat as I go through. What we're going to talk about and look at today, really, there's a couple of things. We're going to be looking at data, if we've got any, from things like analytics, insight, which basically means learning something from that data, like, oh, that data tells us this, we should do this, plus a recommendation of what to do about that. Okay, so data, oh, I wonder that means this. Oh, we should make a recommendation to do this. That can lead then to an outcome that's going to be beneficial to PowerCoders. So this is going to be the format that I will use as we work through everything today. Okay. And before we start then, I like to ask some questions in terms of the organization that I'm working with, okay? And here are my go-to questions. And I always like to talk about some of these questions up front, okay? Particularly these 4 here. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to ask Bettina, are you there? Can you turn on your...
Here.
Hello,
Hi,
how are
Joe.
you doing today? Good to see you.
Good to see you.
I'm going to ask you some questions then. So we know that there are, is it fair to say then on Power Coders, you've got kind of 2 key audiences, is that right?
Even 3.
3, let's talk to me about that then. So who are the three audiences that you have?
Now, on one hand, these are the participants. The participants are refugees or migrants who are taking part at our boot camp, learning to code, and we are doing the job integration afterwards. On the other hand, these are companies, can be HR people or CSR or from different departments who are offering internships.
Gotcha.
And on the third target group are volunteers.
Okay.
Either job coaches or IT trainers.
Okay, gotcha. So participants, number 1. Number 2 are the HR departments who could hire the participants to work, and then the volunteers who kind of get those participants ready for that job. Are those the three rough audiences? All right, great. Okay. Companies and HR. And then we've got volunteers. And of all of those groups, who do you find the most difficult in terms of attracting? Who are the ones that are the most challenging in terms of the ones you want to attract?
So like over the website, I would say the easiest one are the participants, because we have the most information about the program on it. The companies, it's not possible to only convince them over the website. So it's really a sales job. So first we have to get a lead to a company, and then they sign up after quite a time, they sign up on the website. So I think companies is really hard. Volunteers, that works quite well. Okay.
So participants and volunteers, you're kind of happy with. Companies are the ones that are the bigger challenge in terms of that. Okay, that's good to know. Cool. All right. So that's really interesting in terms of what we're going to do now. So I'm going to quickly share the screen here. I'm going to share your analytics, if that's all right, Bettina, with everybody.
Sure.
Not that one. Where's screen? Share screen. Application window. And you can start to see, not surprisingly, once I share my screen here, this is the Google Analytics. You're all very much familiar with it. I like to look down here in behavior. So any UXer who's worth their salt, they jump into the behavior tab of any analytics package, okay? And the best thing to look at and the best place to start with, I find, is very simply is what pages are popular. And you can see that the pages that are popular here are the ones that Bettina's mentioned. All right, not surprisingly. Participants is getting a huge bulk of people coming there. Companies less. Interesting volunteers is less than companies. And that kind of tells us that actually probably that company page is a page that needs a bit of attention and a bit of love. Because if volunteers are coming through, companies are not. And it's understanding why on that page companies are not coming through in quite the same way we'd like them to. So my suggestion would be then to have a look at that companies page in terms of what we look at. Okay, so going to have a little look at that. Companies, here it is here. So you start to have a look at what's going on in terms of how they can do this. Okay, great. And the simple thing I would suggest here, number 1, is a get in touch button, or a simple button to say get in touch with us to learn more. Because I'm guessing, Bettina, if you're you want to talk to companies, don't you? You want to, as soon as possible, you want to have a conversation with a company.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Right. So the best thing to do when you want to have a conversation with one of your customers is to make it as easy as that for them as possible. And that can often mean you limit the information that's there. Not because you don't want to, because you want them to encourage you to call you to find out more, to have more questions and to get in touch with you. And what often can happen with having too much information is there can often be something in there that actually might put them off a little bit from getting in touch with you. There might be a red flag that you don't know about until you talk to them about that. So the biggest thing you can do here, not surprisingly, is put a big call to action that says get in touch, and maybe even just your telephone number would be a great place to start right at the top here in terms of that. because I think that would really help you just drive companies getting in touch with you, really, because you've got good information here. But I think, again, yeah, this is great, but the stuff you need is really getting in touch. All these are really good testimonials, fantastic. We can talk about that in a minute, but the simplest thing you can do is just put a big button there that says get in touch. All right, simple as that. All right. Okay. Let's keep going with some of these then. So I'm going to go back to the homepage, and I'm going to ask you another question here, Bettina, as well. Is what are some of the things you're most proud of? What are your kind of proudest moments over the last year or so? What's something that's made you really proud as an organization?
So the proudest moment for the team is always when a refugee or migrant is signing a job contract and is off of social welfare then and can build a new life. So that's always a moment to celebrate.
Great.
And the other thing are the graduations. So after 3 months boot camp, we are celebrating kind of a graduation with certificates. And that's always a first point of accomplishment for the participants before they starting their internships. And I think I always cried. I always had goosebumps because it's very emotional, these moments.
Yeah,
so,
sure. And what kind of numbers are people graduating? What sort of numbers are you putting through? How many people are graduating in one go? Like, how many has it been over the last year, for example? You know the
so
numbers?
we educated around 200 people since 4 years now.
Okay.
And
Brilliant.
90% of them started an internship. And
Okay.
approximately 60% of all participants we can integrate in a long-term job.
Okay, that's really good. And I think what's interesting, if we go back to the homepage now on the site, is you don't talk about those things. And I think what's interesting here is that's the power. The power of what you've got are those moments that make you feel emotional, like you want to cry, like pictures of the graduation, but also then those numbers about how many people you've helped. Because you can sort of talk about what you do, which is impacting lives by teaching how to code, but that's what you do. That's not the results you get. And you need that kind of killer line, that killer introduction to say, this is really what we're about. So the two things I'd suggest here, I'm hoping on the participants page, you've got some pictures of graduations. Are they down here somewhere? I've seen them somewhere. Where are they? About photography. Here it is. I'm going to open it now. Here it comes. I knew I'd found it. Here it is. Look, this is the good stuff here, isn't it? These are the people that you've helped. Now, I like this one particularly, this group of people, for so many reasons. Okay. So what I would suggest is, again, if we look back on the homepage here, the big critique of this image here is it's lovely. It's beautiful photography, but it's almost too beautiful photography and it looks a little bit stock. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't look like it's real. And I know it probably is real, but it looks just too good to be true, if that makes sense. And it looks like you've gone to stock photos and just pulled a picture that could represent what you're doing. And I think actually the reality is this image here is so much more impactful because it talks about what you're trying to do. It's that idea that this image tells people what you're about as an organization. So my suggestion to you would be to use that as a kind of a place to start in terms of the homepage, the homepage itself. Okay. What are your thoughts on that? What do you think about using some of this imagery?
Absolutely. I completely agree. And this is as well my most favorite picture.
It's lovely. It's such a beautiful picture. It's like, let's use it. So folks, I'm going to jump into my wireframe tool of choice here. Please don't judge me. This is Sketch. So I'm stuck very much in 2017 in terms of design for wireframes. But one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to use this as an imagery to start with on the site here. I'll tidy it up later, but you kind of get the point. This is kind of a strong place to start in terms of something that you're going to try and do here. And I love it. I love that picture. It's really fantastic. And I think what came through in some of those other questions that you mentioned there as well, you can talk about 400 plus people, 400 plus lives changed thanks to companies and volunteers. Okay, so what I'm trying to do here a little bit, and we can work on exactly what that wording might be, but I'm trying to give it a hook to the companies to go, oh, these look like, now I'm going to, with companies, what are some of the concerns that companies have about taking people on? What are some of the concerns that a company might have about taking on somebody on your program? What are their worries and what are their concerns?
That they need too many resources to have an intern.
Yeah.
That they are not that skilled.
Okay.
So they want to have seniors and not junior levels.
Not skilled. Okay. All right. So we're going to tackle both of those things, and I think that's, you can sort of then talk about that in that next strap line there. So you can talk about trained and skilled, training and skills, and something around that. So you're kind of trying to address that straight away. So you've got to use this picture here to help a company feel like they want to help or they want to get involved, that this is something for them. Because I think with participants, currently where you are on the site, you're doing pretty well with them. I think the key is just changing that message and tweaking that message so it talks to everybody here. And I think it's that strap line here. You can also talk about how people can get involved in terms of doing that. So highly skilled. So you can talk about training and skills here. And I'm going to think about that wording when I come back to it. Make a difference. I'll play with that wording as I go through, but we'll kind of get there in terms of this stuff as well. Okay, I'm going to change that to white so you can see it a bit easier. Again, smashing folks, please do forgive me for my dreadful design skills here. I'm just using this as a way to talk about what we're trying to do in terms of this stuff. But immediately you can start to see how that's got a bit more impact than the homepage that's there right now. You've got some much more impact because you can see real humans. Now, one of the things that, again, if I was employed, one of the things that I would be worried about is who are these people? Who are these people? Who are they going to turn up? And I don't think this, but this is what could be thought, that people are going to turn up in like raggedy old clothes, all dirty, just people straight off from somewhere, like a camp somewhere. That could be obviously that's not the view of migrants at all. But what you've got from this picture is these people look great. They look really skilled. They look really motivated. They look really happy. They look really keen to work. And you can see somebody from HR going, these people look great. I want to work with these people. I feel like I can work with these people. And that's really what you want to do, is a company's got to feel not only that they should be doing this, that they want to do this. And that's a hard thing to do. And I think this image does it brilliantly, because these folks look really eminently employable. If I told you this was like the latest startup from Silicon Valley, you'd believe me, wouldn't you? You'd be like, this is my startup from Silicon Valley. Look at these guys. You'd be like, yeah, they look like a great bunch of people. And that's really what you've got from this image. It's got so much going on in terms of everything that's here, from, kids and family and all those things. It's got some really great things here. Okay. And so what you can do here then to really impact this a little bit more is you can start to use some of this then to kind of get people to get in touch with you. And I think this image does it brilliantly. All right. Okay. Right. So there we go. We've got some proud moments. We've got your killer line, and we've got some support in terms of what's going on. So we've really already just turned up the volume of everything you're doing. And I think it's true, certainly for charities and for any organization, you just really want to concentrate on turning the volume up as loud as you can in terms of how you talk about what you're doing. Okay. So more questions then. So I think it's looking at the calls to action down here as well. So I would suggest that we talk about two calls to action here as well, and two strong ones. So the first one we can talk about is for participants. I don't know if that's the right word. And the second one I'm going to talk about is for companies. And I'm going to group them with volunteers. I know that's not exactly right. I need somebody here in CSS to stop my buttons from overflowing, and probably some spelling mistakes as well. But you've got two calls to action here. But it's that idea that you want people to have both of those choices here. And participants, they're a lot more motivated to do things, so they will find a way to get in touch with you. I'm sure they will. For companies and volunteers, you need to make sure that they've got somewhere to really make sure that there feels like there's a space for them to do it. So I'm going to add another little bit of text here, which is just basically, which is get involved. Okay. here. I'll update that in terms of this. Okay, and we've got a much stronger kind of call to action. Obviously, I'll sort out contrast and all of those things later on. This is just a wireframe. But immediately, you kind of can see where we're going with this. You can see that stuff's going on here. All right. Next things down on here then is what's happening at the moment. Tell me something interesting that you're doing right at this moment in time, Bettina. What's going on that's something you're really proud about? What's new? What's coming up? What's launched? What's a piece of news or something that's interesting?
Yeah, currently we have a boot camp running in Switzerland with 19 new participants. The teaching lead is also attending, Susanne.
Okay.
She's also here in the meeting.
Yeah.
I think that's really the highlight. We also have a program in Italy currently running.
Yeah.
That's basically it.
Talk me through any recent companies that you've signed up. Who's recent that's signed up, that's agreed to take somebody? Anybody in particular you can think of that people might know about?
The most recent one, potentially UBS, is one of the biggest partners or the most important partners we have in the program.
And where
sorry?
Where are they in Basel as well?
I didn't catch that.
Of UPS, where are they based in? Are they in Switzerland, in Basel as well, or
in Zurich? They're based in Zurich. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay.
But there are also like a lot of small companies who are signing up. Yeah, besides the big ones.
But the good thing about having a name is it's something called the halo effect. So people know UPS. They're like, oh, I know them. I know that name. That gives me reassurance that PowerCode is for real, that it's a company that I know that I can trust in terms of who I work with. So who else have you got in terms of names that you work with that are, sorry, UBS, isn't it? The the Bank of Switzerland, isn't it? UBS.
Yes.
Who else do you work with?
Adobe.
Oh, look at this. Great. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know what, you know now, folks, what anybody care to guess in the chat what I'm frequently Googling right now? If you do it, you win a special thumbs up for me. What am I doing? No, not screen share. What am I going for in Google right now? I'm looking for something in particular in the images section. What am I looking for? Somebody have a guess? Yeah, exactly. Logos. This is the classic halo effect. And I think, again, what you need in terms of this, come on, let's grab you here. Copy image. Come on, where has it gone? Copy image. Go. Here it is. Is to have, if you put the company logos on there up front, right here, that halo effect is right there. And you've got those great testimonial videos, which you can link to and have that stuff as well. But the key here is that what you've got is the logos of those organizations. I'll drop Adobe in there as well. You've got those great videos, which we'll talk about in a minute. Copy image. But you can immediately start to see then that you get that. You've got lots of these images at the bottom of the page, but these are the images that you're using to. Yeah, it's really interesting for you, smashing folks, watching me resize an image that's far too big for my world. Everybody's now shouting at me, just use some other tool. But anyway, you get it. But you kind of get the point. Is by having those images in there up front, other companies can go, well, if Adobe are involved, if UBS are involved, it must be legitimate. They must be getting some value from this. I would like to see my company alongside these same people. So you're having that halo effect of this sort of stuff as well. That can be really, really useful in terms of these things. Thanks, Vanessa. Yeah, I know everybody's now frantically shouting, that's Sketch Life. Okay, good. It's not just me, my bad sketch skills. But you get the point, okay? But you can start to see how we've already got some credibility there with well-known, well-liked companies and organizations in terms of that. Now, you can still use those videos on the company page, and those videos will be really strong, but having them here in terms of those logos is just a really simple, straightforward way of doing that as well. Add a couple more. So I'll put some placeholders for some other logos in there as well. But ideally, it's companies and organizations that are known in certain locations. Talk me through, while we're here, Bettina, talk me through language in Switzerland and Italy. Is everything okay to be in English?
as it is so complicated in Switzerland with French, Italian, German,
Okay.
we do everything in English.
Right. And the same, what about Italy? Is that the same?
It's the same.
Okay.
Hopefully.
Right. I'm just checking. I'm not sure if that's completely done there yet. Anyway, we'll talk about that later on. But anyway, training and skills that make a difference to companies. Yeah, okay, you're right. I don't think that strapline's quite right. That make a difference. I think let's just get rid of the word to companies. Make a difference to lives. Don't know, something like that. Make a difference. Just make a difference. We can work on that strapline as we kind of go through. But do drop ideas into the chat if you want to help me with that. Okay. So back to this thing. This is the news here. The key thing here with news is you want something that makes your site feel like something's happening. Let me share this. I'll share something else here. So one of the things we can talk about with the current site here is it doesn't look like much is happening at the moment. It's quite static. And now this is a real issue and problem. This is where I get a little bit technical. If you use things like static site generators, like you've got with something like the stuff you're using with Netlify, they don't always encourage you to have active content working on the site. It's a bit of a challenge to kind of get that there. And static sites often favor static content, and it can get you into a trap to kind of do stuff that's more updated, more accurate. How easy is it at the moment for you, Bettina, to update your website with latest news or things like that? How easy is it for you to do it at the moment?
So if it's like standard changes, it's quite easy. But to be honest, we normally don't do it that often. As you can see on the page right now, there's only one use box. So there could be more.
There could be more. And I think it's a challenge you've always got to face. And one of the things you've got to get right in requirements is something a bit more about news. And it's kind of just got to be impactful. And the thing is, nobody comes to your site to read the news. They never do. But it's nice to have it there sprinkled across everywhere. So having a section which is just news, nobody really honestly cares so much about that. The things they care about is just seeing sprinklings of news across everywhere. So the way to think about dynamic content like news is sprinkle it everywhere across the site. Okay. And that helps the site feel more up to date, that things are happening, that things are going on in this particular world. So a simple way that I can suggest to do that, and I'll jump back to the wireframes here, is something called I call it the now bar, and it's just a bar you can place across the center of your site to kind of look at, to kind of put the news on in terms of what you're doing. So I'm going to turn off layout as well to help you with this a bit more. You can kind of start to see it's a little news here. Okay, and you can start to see that there's a little something happening on the site here as well. So if you just like launched a program in Italy, you drop that in here. If you just signed up a new company, you drop that in here. So this is a quick way of just giving some updates as to what in fact is going on the site as it is right now. Okay, right, I'm just going to jump into the Q&A because I think there's a couple of questions that people have mentioned in here. Languages, multi-website languages. Okay, so Leonard's got some interesting questions about the site and stuff like that. Multilingual, good questions. Yeah, you're talking about me. So I've done a lot of work multilingual. When I worked for Marriott, it launched in 36 countries and 18 languages. And language is always a challenging thing to get right, really. And there are certain countries in the world that are absolutely perfectly okay with English, and there are certain countries that aren't. And Italy was a bit of a red flag for me in terms of that. It's got the quality of spoken and written English in Italy, I apologize if you're Italian, I don't mean this as a broad thing, is a little lower. So often getting success in somewhere like Italy, especially at a sort of older generation and within a company, is quite hard. So of languages, again, you're probably already thinking about this, but I would think about for something like Italy, you may have to go into language, but only perhaps on things like the company page or a place for Italian businesses to do that, or a download of a PDF or something like that. That might help in terms of some of this stuff as well. All right, I'm going to keep going then in terms of the rest of these questions. So I asked you a couple of questions there. Are there any other kind of organizational pain points you have, Bettina? Is there anything else that you wish you could make easier in terms of attracting people, talking to people, getting people to work with you? Is there anything in particular that's a pain point for you at the moment or difficult?
I would say like the challenge is always like, where do we focus on in our communication as we are having these different groups we're targeting? So which language are we using? How do we onboard them? Like also with the buttons, we have a lot of action buttons on there, but sometimes not very obvious.
Yeah.
Where to really sign up then in the end. So it's,
okay.
For me, the whole experience to find what you're looking for is not always obvious. I would say that's on the website, that's the main point. More in terms of organization. So the most important thing is to get enough companies, enough internships to really onboard them to engage with our purpose. That's one of the biggest parts.
Okay. So simple ways we can try to do that. I'm going to share the wireframe again now. Is I'm going to look at up here. So the simple thing you can do up here is you can add email us up here and call us. Now this is again. Sorry, my sketch skills are weak at the moment. Do forgive me. In terms of this. You can start to put some call to action up there as well. Now, this is, again, broad brush, but people who are not hugely confident with language will jump to email. People who want to get more information in quite a large way will call you. So you can suggest it by putting your telephone number up there for companies to give you a call to get them onboarded as fast as possible. Because what we talked about it a bit before, but you want companies to, as many ways as possible for them to get in touch with you, as gently as possible in terms of getting in touch, rather than where at the moment you're kind of, I suppose you're, let me share the site right now. You're funneling them through a page. Let's start it here. So if you go to the homepage here, you go into companies, again, loads of information, how I can do it, loads of information to read, there's lots here, lots of things to read. What do companies say about us? There's lots of things that people feel like they have to learn, to download in terms of what they want to do before they can actually get in touch. How do they get in touch with you here? What do you tend to do here? Contact down here.
It's a little bit up on the, there, the career day. So the onboarding is, they're signing up for a career day. Okay.
And what's that?
The career day is the day where they meet the participants. It's kind of a speed dating. You see there in the picture on how this works.
Check.
It's a 5-minute chat with every participant, and then they select 2 to 3 where they have further interviews with.
Got it. Okay, great. So I think this is interesting, because I think what's that call to action, it doesn't mean much. You had to explain it to all of us here what career day is before they clicked on it. So nobody's going to click on that because they don't know what it is. So the key thing here, I mean, the very basic thing we talked about here is just changing that to get in touch. But you could start to drop a lot of this content down. You could start, take a lot of it off here, like career days. I mean, you can have that content there and send it to people, but you want to guide companies through the process by hand. You want to make sure that they are comfortable all the way through. And by giving them the hard work of reading all of this stuff and deciding if that's what they want, that hard work's on them, not on you. And it should really be the other way around. You know, you can give them all this information in a 15-minute phone call, build a relationship with them in that phone call, in that contact, rather than having all this information here. So my suggestion to you here would be much more on this page is focus less on what the program's about, but more the benefits to the business, really, in terms of what's going on. So what they get highly skilled people. They get to look at and work towards their company, corporate social responsibility guidelines. All those things is to put the key benefits on here in terms of what they get, and remove the information about that program, because that information about that program, I think, is holding you back a bit. So I would start by looking at this page and go, oh, we need to put a lot more information here about the benefits to a company in terms of doing that. So what I'm going to suggest we do is we can do that on the company page, but I think it might be better to do that on here as well. So I'm going to jump back to my wireframe here, and I'm going to put it at the bottom here. How are we doing for time, Vitaly? Am I doing okay for time right now?
So we're good in time. We actually started like 35 minutes ago, 35 minutes ago. So we still have like 10, 15 minutes.
Great. I'm going to do a little bit more then, and I'll open it up for some other questions. But I'm going to suggest, I'm going to pull some blocks in from over here. So by the way, folks, if you want this sketch wireframe template, you're more than welcome to have it. It's not the best in the world, but it suits my needs because it means I can work quickly. So I can co-design with people as I'm doing this stuff. That's the benefit and the thing I like about this template. Make your own, but I'm going to leave it and jump it in the chat now. Is no, that's not what I want. Where's the link? Copy link. Here it is. There it is. You can download it yourself, and it's got all of these things in it for you to set up and make your own. My goal with any wireframe is to get there as quickly as I possibly can. Now, nobody's asked me about mobile here. We're not talking about that. I always think mobile sites are really easy to design because everything's linear in the line. The harder sites for me are always desktop. Anyway, you can discuss that in the chat if you like to, but that's my feeling on these things. Anyway, so for participants, and I'm going to put another one over here for companies. So I'm going to put 2 boxes here, and these are effectively going to be the benefits to doing while you're doing what's good about doing what you're doing here. Okay, and I'm going to start with companies. So what are the benefits? What do companies love about working with you, Bettina? What do they like about it?
Mainly, I would say that they support people to reshape their life, to give them like kind of a second chance to establish a new independent life. I would say that's the main reason. Second reason, also very important, is that there is a lack of skilled workers, like in IT industry.
Okay.
Not only in Switzerland, I think. So they're building new skilled people. So I would say these are the 2 main reasons why they are partnering with us.
I'm going to change the wording, but I'm trying to give the benefits here in terms of everything that's there as well. Okay, perfect. We haven't talked much about participants. What's the benefits to them? What do they love about the program? Tell me about what they love about it.
Several things, but the most important part is that we are doing the job integration. So they're really facing barriers in entering the Swiss job market. Sometimes they're quite skilled, like they're having a bachelor in IT or whatever, but they're really facing barriers due to different reasons. And we are supporting them to getting comfortable with the Swiss culture, on how we work here, but also with some coding stuff. So we are teaching both. It's one part is really about coding, and the other part is about business and soft skills.
Yeah.
And then we are trying to integrate them into an industry. And that's what is really differentiating us from other programs, which is made for refugees in Switzerland.
Integrate. Okay, so start with skills, because that's the one we have to start. Okay, IT and job skills, because I think that's key. And I think what's interesting about that as well, because you haven't mentioned that, and I think that's one of the things that companies may not be sure about. If I'm getting somebody who can code a site or do React or whatever the languages might be, but are they ready for a job? And I think that's interesting. It's like job ready. And so I'm going to change that wording, but the idea that they're ready for work, it's not just that you're giving them coding skills, you're giving them the life skills to also support doing that, you know, that they are going to be, I know it's condescending, but they're going to be there on time, they're going to do a great job. All of those things that people are unsure about in terms of why I would do this is you've got job ready applicants with.
Absolutely. So that's also a learning path from our side. So we started just with coding skills, and then we saw that they are facing huge problems in integrating in the workplace. Like, as you're saying, like being on time, that's not the same thing in every country and can be culturally different. So that's why we implemented also these skills.
Great. That's really good to know, because I think that can really help, is that is that confidence then, if I'm going to employ somebody on this scheme, that they can do a great thing on the website, but they're not going to, they're going to be an asset to the company in more ways, that they're going to come up, they're going to be there on time. And you don't have to say it in those words, but that's the way we talk about it here as well. Yeah, into the working mode. Okay. And the thing you've got to understand with both of these two boxes is participants are going to be reading the company box and companies are going to be reading their participant box. It's never one that they'll just read one box that's just for them. So these two have got to kind of cross work with each other in terms of how these things work. I think that can be really helpful to think about that when you're writing copy, is how do you basically get people to, to understand that they're going to be reading a lot more than this stuff, because this is quite an involved process. They're going to be doing a lot of reading and understanding. All right. Should we talk about volunteers? Bettina, tell me about volunteers and how you find them and how they differ from companies.
So there are two different volunteers. On one hand, we are supporting us during teaching, during school phase.
Okay.
So they're supporting the teaching lead. Can be with a specific language or whatever.
Okay.
And on the other hand, we have job coaches. That means these are people who are supporting participants in their internship.
Gotcha.
So they're kind of a sparring partner for whatever the concern is. Can be something very private, that they're struggling with money issues or whatever, and can be very work-related. So how to approach other people, how to ask questions, if there are problems occurring. So it's really someone who is besides them. And the IT trainers, we mainly gain through corporate volunteering. So it also comes through companies. And the job coaching can also be corporate volunteering, but mostly we have private people who want to get involved into our program.
And what do they like about getting involved? What do volunteers get from doing it? What do they say they love about you, the volunteers? What do they like?
Supporting people who are less privileged than Swiss people.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to be sharing this again. I'm going to do some, I'm going to even up my columns before we do that as well. So sort of supporting people who are less privileged. I think it's great. Anybody in the chat, how do you spell privileged? I'm a bit stuck here. Privileged. I used to be an English teacher. There's the irony. I used to teach English and my spelling is terrible. Okay, support people who are less privileged. Okay, let's keep going. Anything else? So that's something they want to do. What else? Anything else that they love about you? Still muted, Bettina.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
It's all right.
It's also like the coaching part to give knowledge to another person. What else? Getting to know another culture. So it's very interesting to open your own horizon. What else?
That's good. That's fine. We've got 3. That's enough for now. I'll reshape these columns in a minute. I'm still deciding here. Teaching skills. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Folks. So I'm torn here. Now, a designer and a CSS person would be, they don't do a lot of teaching. All right, I'm going to take that out, Susanna. Thank you. Thank you. I'd be torn here. If I was a designer, designers would go, why should we put these in 3 columns? And as a CSS person, I'd put these in 3 columns. I'm thinking about putting these in 3 columns, but I don't think I'm going to do that. Because I think there's a definite order here in terms of the way that these should be seen. And I think for participants have got to lead, companies have got to be second, and volunteers have got to be third. And if we put companies in the middle, they're going to get squashed and might get missed. We've got companies on the end, they might get missed. So I'm kind of happy with this 3-up square here, this 3 approach here, is that from a layout point of view, 3 would look better, but from a kind of legibility and readability and business objective point of view, this design works a little bit better. So we'll see what happens over the course of the night. If these end up in 3 columns, maybe they will. Audience, I need you to support me about why that's not necessarily a good idea. But ordering them like this is a better flow through the content. It's a bit more prioritized. It doesn't look as good, but we can work on that as we go through, really, in terms of how this can work. All right. Let's keep going then. Hey V, how am I doing for time at the moment? Am I doing okay?
Hey Joey, hello Bettina. Well, we're actually running a little bit out of time at this point, but we still have a
good place to slow down then, isn't there?
Excellent. We still have a few questions in the Q&A of wonderful attendees who have some questions about the process and some things that you addressed and you didn't address. So maybe I can just jump in, unless you want to wrap up first, Joey.
Yeah, I'm going to wrap up first and we'll look at some of those questions.
Right.
So I'm going to talk to you about this. So what I'm going to do then is I've got kind of quite a basic wireframe here. Let me just check it's still viewing. Okay, you can see. Okay, I've got quite a basic wireframe here. I'm going to update some of the navigation in terms of what's going on, but you can kind of see the stronger impact we've got with that image alone. That image alone has transformed, I think, what we're looking at. Such a lovely picture. But we've got some higher impact on here as well. So we've got some better calls to action about what's going on. We've got higher impact with these statements at the top. We can work on these as we go through. We've got 2 cool keys to action for participants and for companies and volunteers to know where to go next. We've got that life and that vibrancy through the now bar, the things that are happening right now. We've got that halo effect of the wider companies that are working with power coders, so that if I'm a company, I trust these folks. And if I'm a participant, I can look at that and go, Adobe, what an amazing job. I'd love to get a job at Adobe. So there's a real aspirational element we're playing to there as well. I've added a couple of things in here about SEAL companies and, again, support power coders for companies. They may want to do that here. We've got these very specific deep dive boxes for each individual group of people here to learn a little bit more about what's in it for them. And what we did to get the stuff in these boxes is I asked Bettina, what do people love about the product that's there right now? Okay, not what is it, but what do they love about it? What's the emotional drivers behind all of these things? And you can see that this copy is a lot more impactful than what's on the Power Coder site now, which is all about 12-week programs and skills and React and all of that stuff. That's fine. This is the real stuff that's going to get people involved. They're going to raise that emotional level, that engagement through much more powerful copy. Okay, we've looked at the 3 types of groups and we've put different language for each of them as to why they should get involved with power coders. So we've really pressed some emotional buttons here, and we haven't talked about things like button color or carousels or any of that detail, because honestly, fiddling with the detail of those sorts of things can get you an incremental improvement. What to do to really leapfrog and get a strong, higher improvement, a real jump in improvement, is by answering some of those questions that I just talked about there with Bettina. Okay, some very simple questions you can ask your organization to really turn up the volume of what you're trying to do, to really turn up that emotional engagement, not faff around with button colors and sliders and all of those things that can often be the preserve of many a UX review. That's not how I like to do things. All right, that's me wrapping up. V, any thoughts on where we go next?
Yes, thank you so much, Bettina. Thank you so much, Joey, for kind of leading us through the process. There are a couple of questions that I think it would be cool to answer to some of them before we go into a short break. By the way, just a quick note, I don't mean to be too promotional, but I heard, Joey, that you're going to run a workshop at some point very soon. Maybe even with us, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, next week after next week or the week after, I think. It's the early May, isn't it? I'm doing you can learn all of these skills and so many more. I'm doing my psychology workshop. So how to use psychology to improve and supercharge your product. So you get all of this, but you'll also get some really strong science in terms of doing this stuff as well. Yeah, May 6th. Charis has just put it in there as well. Come on to my workshop. You get to hang out with me more than anything else.
Exactly. Well,
yeah, also we get to learn a lot about what's going on.
Which also brings us to a very interesting point, which actually came up in the conversation in the Q&A as well. Dennis was wondering, Joey is a scientist. So when we look into psychology, how ethical it is to use neuroscience in making people more addicted to your products?
Oh yeah, and it's really not ethical at all. If you look at what I we did here today, this was all psychologically based. It was all about talking about emotion, but it was in a very positive way. If you're using emotion to get people to do something they shouldn't be doing or don't want to do, then you're in the wrong place. If you're trying to get people to be addicted to your product, that's not what you need to be doing. You need to be talking to people in a way that gets them excited and enthusiastic about what you're doing, not manipulating them with tricks and tips. I talk about that a lot in my workshop because I hate all of that behavioral control stuff, because it works incrementally in improving something, but you can never really make a huge improvement through those small tricks unless you do the things that we're doing today. Really understanding how people feel is the key to what a lot of what you've got to do, and that's just what we've just done today.
Yeah, so it's always kind of a very interesting line between like what is still psychology and what is kind of manipulation, right? So I think that in many ways, we don't want that. But on the other hand, there was also another question, which actually more a question for Bettina, I think. Susanna Koenig wrote, I think the current challenge is that the site started out as being just for Switzerland, and now it has become international. Plus also the things that we kind of targeted or spoke about in the very beginning of the design kind of changed as well. So how do you maneuver between maybe businesses having slightly different priorities and trying to address everyone? Because now the tone has changed, right? Or maybe Bettina, from your side of view, so it has changed. Is it something that you envisioned, or would you feel should be kind of the right approach there? Or would you kind of want to see it in a bit more broad and target individually every single other audience or other part of the audience as well?
Yeah, Susanna is not absolutely right with the international perspective. So it used to be really focused on Switzerland. That's why also the logos, the company logos, are mainly Swiss companies still. And we started internationally about 1 year ago, and we addressed the other projects with subsites. So you see below in the footer, you have Switzerland, you have Italy, but it's not very obvious, to be honest. Right now you have like the purpose and everything over, which counts for every program, but then you have subsites. But most information is still very Swiss-based. So it would really need a kind of a relaunch to look at from an international perspective and then have the subsites. But it's the target groups is the same story for every country, for every program. So it's always about the companies, always about participants, and always about volunteers.
Right. I think that this is also what Susanne meant. Joey, maybe from to you question that kind of connected to that. How do you deal with the fact that sometimes companies try to just, I mean, I don't know about you, but I've been in these situations thousands of times where the left hand of the company doesn't really know what the right hand of the company does. And then you end up kind of being sandwiched between different parts of the organization driving different priorities. So how do you then decide what to do actually?
I mean, that's hard. I think if you're in that situation, so to be successful in both UX and in with product management and really in design, you've got to be a communicator. And part of your job is to communicate with both sides of the organization to mediate and understand what the situation is. So the most successful UX designers and product managers know both sides of the organization intimately. They've got having conversations across both sides of those organizations. They know about initiatives in Italy and Switzerland, and they are doing the work to square that circle. They're doing the work to bring that together, and they do that through communication. It's all about communication. And as I mentioned at the start of what I did, it's about asking the right questions. It's not about having the right answers. That's really not what it's about. It's about asking the right questions to those sides of the organization, like saying to one side of the organization, hey, how could we work better with our colleagues in Italy? You know, starting those conversations off so that everybody's coming to an agreement about what they should do. And by asking a question, you get a much stronger response than saying, we should do this or we should do that. No, ask a question. What do you think we should do to better integrate two sides of this company? And ask both sides and see what comes back. Because then you get an agreement from everybody involved, rather than anything that's, you telling them what to do, which they'll never respond very well to.
Yeah, well, I think we'd just go forever, but I always remember the things about you. The first one is that you always say that you're doing the right things, trying to do the right things in the right order For the right reasons.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Damn it, I've forgotten. I actually almost memorized it, but I've forgotten it. So that's kind of always stuck with me. But then, I mean, as we're wrapping up here, you do need to explain the story about being 1% Mongolian.
Yeah, do you know, I had one of those genetic tests done because my daughter, when she was born, she had very classic Asian eyes, and I remember having a difficult conversation with my wife about it, and my wife going, maybe we should get one of those DNA tests done. So I did. I went and had a DNA test done, and it turns out my family is 1% Mongolian. We've managed to trace it back, we think, in the family line to where it's come from. But when we understood that, we can understand it. Because if you met me in public, I'm short and I'm quite squat and strong, which is the classic Mongolian look. So the more I learned about my Mongolianness, the more it answered a lot more questions about me and my daughter in terms of that. But it was through one of the DNA tests. It was fascinating.
Interesting. Well, maybe who knows? Maybe you have relatives going all the way back to Genghis Khan. Who knows?
Oh, I mean, that would be lovely, wouldn't it? But yeah, who knows?
Yeah, I heard he has many relatives.
I think he has
all right.
He has quite a lot of yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
excellent. So thank you so much, Joey. Thank you so much, Bettina. Joey, from your end, we would need your sketch file so we can move on with Stephanie, who's going to try to look into it, or maybe into.
Now.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Right,
and so, dear friends,
thank you, everybody else. I'm going to go on mute, and I'll catch you guys soon. Thank you very much. Oh,
absolutely.
Folks, if you want to get in touch with me as well, do get in touch. Here's my details. I've got my LinkedIn there, my email. Just reach out with a question. I'd love to chat. Find me on Twitter. Find me on LinkedIn. I always love to chat. So yes. Thanks.
Joey is also extremely friendly. Probably one of the friendliest people I know. So please go ahead and.
Thanks, V. It means a lot coming from you.
My pleasure.
Love you all, smashing. Love you. Bye bye.
Oh, thanks, Joey. All right, so we are moving on. Stephanie, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good. You can see I'm still sunshiny, so it's about 1:15 in my time zone.
All right. Okay, so in my end, it's getting dark, so I actually do need this light out there. So wonderful to see you again. For those of you who don't know Stephanie, I mean, it's really difficult not to know Stephanie, I think, because she's been publishing, writing, announcing things and collecting things about 11C and design systems and accessibility and CSS and everything. And so if you don't know Stephanie, she's a front-end focused software engineer, and she is the author of moderncss.dev, where she obviously does a lot of modern CSS, where you take all the good and old things that we got problems that we had to deal in the past or still today, but instead of solving them with a hacky CSS way, we can also do that with modern CSS way, and that's exactly what Stephanie highlights there. She also is a mom of 2 girls and a cowboy corgi, and also enjoy baking. I didn't know that. That's wonderful to hear. And one interesting fact I know about Stephanie is that she grew up on a small family farm riding horses, which of course brings you to CSS, because this is just a normal path to CSS.
Yep, just found it along the trail one day.
Excellent. And so today we are looking into what we can do with what Joey has designed and what we also have on the Power Coders website, and turn it into the CSS layout or anything of that kind. I guess that this is going to be the journey that we're going to take. Stephanie, am I right?
Yes, and I'm working on sharing my screen, which I, of course, forgot about having to give it permission. So we'll make sure that it...
Sure, no worries. In the meantime, while you're doing that, everyone, please give a warm, I don't know, what would be what is your favorite emoji, Stephanie? Do you have
favorite
one?
Emoji? Oh, I tend to use the sparkles a lot.
Oh, excellent. Well, then I would like to invite everyone to send a huge wave of sparkling emoji in the chat to welcome her on stage. So Stephanie, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Well, we are going to have a packed hour or slightly less than, so I'm sure to hit some of your bingo items, which I don't know what those are. So Joe, awesome session. I just grabbed screenshots of what you had. I don't have Sketch on my machine, so we'll try to get as far as we can on the kind of HTML semantics here as our starting point, and work a little bit towards styling as much as we can as well. So just kind of in evaluating what the sections Joe's kind of proposed here. And keeping in mind that we're hopeful that what we can produce is something power coders can pick back up and continue working with, continue using. So I think that looking at their current site, I think that what we're sort of replacing is the top of the page up until about this section. This is kind of the last part Joe left off with, essentially, is replacement content here. So my specialties span mostly CSS, HTML. I happen to have a degree in advertising and worked in an ad agency for 8 years. So I carry with me a little bit of knowledge about advertising, marketing, and UX, although it's not my core specialty. So Joe, definitely bump me in the chat if you disagree and would like to see any of these other sections taken off. One thing I also noticed that maybe we want to retain is a link to this video. It seems like that might have some importance. So I'm wondering if as a starting place, we actually use the video link here. And of course, links can be changed later. The whole hierarchy can be changed. We'll focus more on kind of making some template parts, making some layout CSS that can be reused in different areas across the site. So with that all said, I have their site pulled up here. Thank you, Charis, for getting this code prepared for us so that we can move as efficiently as possible. And so, you know, I haven't done any pre-work. I've just launched VS Code. I just adjusted the font size settings, which, by the way, if it's still not large enough, or if you're having trouble with my theme, let me know. And it looks like there's a little delay when I scroll. I can see on screen there. Hopefully that resolves. So let me know if you do have any issues seeing anything at any time. I will try not to switch screens too much, but I do need to, I want us all to be able to refer back to the mockup that was created.
Yes, just
Okay.
on my end, Stephanie, it looks like it's a bit choppy. It seems like there are a couple of rectangles that are moving separately.
Yeah,
Maybe
I
you can
see
stop
that.
sharing and start again.
Okay, should we try? Okay, yep, let's try that.
Although, yeah, let's try that. It might also be easier if you share the entire screen. It looks like maybe you're sharing only half of it or a particular window. But
I'm
it's up to
sharing
you.
from my laptop. It should be the whole
Yeah,
screen.
now it seems like I can see everything.
Okay.
Yeah. So if there is something else, is there something like going on? I'll jump in if you don't mind.
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Cool. So now that we have a little more direction from Joe's session, and as I mentioned, we're going to essentially take out the top part up until here, and we'll just kind of see how far we get with rebuilding. So we'll kind of have to discover how this HTML is constructed. We want to take it up until the we offer section. So quite a ways down, it looks like. So of course, this will be the more a little bit slower part of the presentation, but there we go. I think that has removed what we'd like. I'm not going to do the nav today, just in consideration of the time. So we will kind of start top down and see how far we get. So one thing that also stood out to me as I was doing just a very, very quick review of the site is maybe a little confusion in our heading hierarchy. And Carrie's going to talk a lot about accessibility. It's something I'm passionate about as well. But the one topic that I am going to bring up, just because I noticed it as a concern and it impacts the semantics and the CSS part that I'm working with, is the heading hierarchy. So we took out some of that already. And, you know, there is good use of like the nav element appropriately for the navigation. So, all right. So what we were going to start to do is, and you know what? I need to make sure, yeah, that should still be attached. There we go. Okay. So what we were going to start to do is start to essentially with HTML wireframe out Joe's wireframe. So of the parts that we took out, of course, the first thing that we need to bring back in is the hero section. And is a separate element and we're not touching that. It's already, you know, that's appropriate semantics and hierarchy for the nav in this instance. we're going to go ahead and make this a header element. And we also know that ultimately the styles that we apply here probably will end up being applied across the site. So we actually have a couple decision points already, besides the semantics of it. Probably as we start to design styles, keeping in mind, again, that's going to apply other places on the site, they may not always have the CTA. So we're going to have some interesting challenges to work through to consider our homepage hero, but also make sure it's can be reused on other pages of our site. So let's at least start with our semantics. For the sake of efficiency, I'm in VS Code, I'm using Emmet, which will help just provide our elements back a little faster. So if you're wondering what that was, it's called Emmet. And we know that we have a pretty significant headline text here. And so I am going to lorem some of it out, just again for expediency here. And the other section that we have, I think Joe had a subhead in here, so we can leave room for a little bit of extra text. And then finally, we had a couple CTAs that we're going to end up working with. So I think we'll end up wanting to have kind of a container for those to help us position them down the road. So we have a secondary, and then of course our button elements. And for our button elements, that's going to be one that I'm going to skip restyling out today. So let's find one of those and we'll copy it in. And I'm saying button. They are, of course, links semantically. They are just currently styled as buttons. Important distinction there. So that's not going to be our correct link. I'll turn that back to Power Coders team to correct the links down the line. But our two options here were for participants and then for companies and volunteers. So we might find out that our button doesn't support such a long title, and then we may have to do an adjustment here. Okay, so let's see what we have so far. And of course, it's not going to be pretty, but we have a good starting point here. So moving on down the page, we'll come back and style it. And our next section is kind of this call out. And we mentioned maybe for now we'll have it actually go to that video. And again, Joe, let me know if you feel differently after kind of reevaluating the progress here. Okay, so they already had this band. Let's see what that was constructed with so we can reuse a little bit. So we have kind of this class, it looks like, that we can add in. So, you know, when you're evaluating a site that maybe you've been asked to adjust, of course, an important consideration is, you know, what sorts of frameworks and tools they're already using. And in this case, I believe Materialize is the framework being used. And that's, you know, excellent to help get projects off the ground. We can kind of see, though, in the parts that we've left on the page, that in some instances, we are looking at areas where there may serve us well to have a little more custom solution. What really stood out to me is that you can see the cards that we haven't addressed yet. You know, in the standard grid, we're hitting a little bit of an issue. So I'm hoping we can get far enough to address some of those types of things. But for now, my kind of strategy for our hour here is to reuse some of, you know, kind of the, you know, bringing back in this red so we don't have to create a separate style for that. But we'll be creating some brand new styles as well to handle these different scenarios. So we have, now it might be a section, we could argue that it was an aside, which that has a special inherited role of complementary by default. And that's going to affect a screen reader's perception of the hierarchy, but I'll let Carie talk more about that. So let me think about this a second. this probably does make sense as an aside, and then we'll see about what we want to do with our logos. So for now, we are going to have just a small call to action. Again, I'm not going to worry about real text here. Just give us roughly the character count that we eventually will have in this space, and add in our button. And we'll have to find out if there is a alternate button. I think the alternate button was this green. And if anybody in Power Coders know if you have a third button color, we will definitely grab that. Okay, it looks like that's the default with no additional class on it. Cool. So moving on from there, we have our logo section. And this is always interesting. So I'm going to, I think that I will add a optional headline in here to kind of introduce this section. So I'm going to add on to what Joe has, just thinking about the hierarchy of the page and somebody that might be navigating non-visually and trying to discover what types of information is on the page. Sometimes sometimes you may see instructions or advice to do an ARIA label if you don't have a visible headline. The trouble with that, as particularly for a site like this, that we know is serving an international audience, is that ARIA labels will not be translated. So that's why I'm going to go ahead and add a visible headline to get us started to introduce the logos section. So maybe we will call it who we work with as a starting point. That can obviously always be changed. Or yeah, anybody have suggestions? We can resolve that in the chat as well. And then we'll start to set up a list that will hold our grid of images eventually. And there we go. So for now, I'm just going to throw placeholder images, although we do have the, I think this is still valid, hopefully. My usual go-to, let's see if it still works for me. Oh, they may have taken it offline or not. Everybody has a favorite placeholder service. There we go. Okay. And we can, I used to use Place Corgi, but that sometimes has an SSL issue as well. Okay, so we'll fill those in and obviously adjust and supply a grid here in a little bit. And that section ends with a couple more CTAs. So let's just, to make it easy on ourselves, we will grab these and update the text. We might end up doing something like this. We probably would want to actually genericize so that we can make it not so specific as section CTAs. We might want to, when we readdress this, when we start thinking about our CSS for a grid layout, we might attach it more utility styles. But for now, we'll go with that while we're just kind of getting the essentials laid out on the page. Let's make sure, see all companies. I'll go ahead and put this real text here. So remember the hierarchy of information. And also support cool. So we're getting close through our semantics of these sections. The last thing is these how to get involved. And again, I'm going to add that visible headline of, for now, how to get involved. And this is an interesting section semantically to me. It's probably we haven't actually added a main element to the page. This is probably the main content in terms of the home page, where we're really telling you about the program. So that's what I'm gonna go forward with for now. Home pages are always a little bit difficult, I think, because you have so many sections of content. So sometimes that call of what it should be semantically can be a little bit tricky. All right, so we basically have 3 sections. They're going to eventually fall into a grid. So probably we might, since we're in our main already as our landmark, we might just go ahead and make these sections. You could maybe argue that they should be articles. We'll have to see like where the content for those goes. If maybe those eventually get a CTA added as well to link off. So we basically just within these, oh, I said I was going to add a headline of how to get involved, which I think that's in my mind. I believe that's the language used out here at some point. Or I may have made that up. Okay, so we basically have lists, headlines and lists, participants, and lists of, we'll do 4 items for now. And actually, anybody have a favorite placeholder service? There's so many, they can get a little wild. And I'm just going to duplicate this 2 more times for companies and for volunteers. And I'm sorry, go ahead and interrupt me if you see a question come up. I'm kind of focused on the on the chat, but if there's something in line or code part.
Yeah, one interesting question that came up actually, let me see if we can find it, was from Jane, who was wondering, why wouldn't we use Power Coders for H1?
Great question. And I guess I would throw that back to Joe. So as myself as the kind of developer working through the layout, like I said, I have a little inkling of, some of those UX decisions or copyright decisions, but, I would agree. Maybe and the other thing is we haven't modified the header. So, maybe that would be an adjustment that would happen when we update the nav, but I see Joe back on. What's Joe's thoughts?
I would say for SEO, the strapline would be better as an H1, but it's semantics at this point. But I would say the strapline would be a better place to start with that. But equally, it could be the logo.
Cool.
But yeah, strap perhaps. So I'm having to talk quietly because my daughter's asleep. So do excuse me being a bit quieter. Hopefully, you can all hear me.
Yes, everybody can hear you, Joey, always.
No worries. All right, so I think that gets us through. Oh, they must have a style to remove list styling hanging out here. So we'll check that out because we'll want to bring it back for these particular lists. So cool. So I have just a blank style sheet. We're not using Sass or anything today, just vanilla style CSS today. But let's get started on our hero. And I'm going to, our header, but I'm going to give it a class of hero. And there's going to be some styles that will apply globally that I'm going to attach to hero. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we know already that our homepage is probably going to be different than the internal pages, which might not have any calls to action on them. So we could say hero home. We could say hero extended. Naming's always a fun thing to work out. I'm going to keep the we've picked up on the other areas and go ahead and say hero CTAs just in case they do want to use it on internal pages. Then home would feel weird to say again, hero. Good suggestion. Okay, so the other interesting thing when you're coming into a new project is maybe, as we saw with the list items down here, is some things may be missing that you expect to be there. And that's, that can be an interesting thing to work out. Do you tear out the old or do you build new? And today we're going to go with build new, mostly so that power coders can see distinctly what changes were made. And, there definitely would be some like cleanup and integration to revisit after this work. All right, so we'll just go down the page so we can start to see some impact here. And the other thing, of course, is adding our image. Knowing that they're using a ultimately a static site generator, and that this is probably going to be different per page, and maybe in the future there will be some type of CMS coming in. You could certainly make the argument that we would want this to be an image in the page, and we definitely can do that with modern CSS. We can make it fill the area and become a background image. For today, being cognizant of my time, I'm going to go ahead and do it as a background image, just to more efficiently get to the layout part of the elements within the hero. But definitely considerations to be made there. And I noticed that that was the image for, was it the about page? Oh, I'm gonna have, oh, it's just a large image. I was just gonna sneak in here and see where that path was, again, just to move us along a little quicker. Whoa, and it jumped on me. So image header underscore about, okay. Okay, so if we know that maybe it's going to be coming in from a CMS, I also come from WordPress land. I did WordPress themes for 10 years. So this was a trick I employed quite a lot, but also it was before we had some of the modern CSS tools that we could be using. So I have an article on that if you're interested in other ways you could go about this and keeping the image. So I bet though that, okay, yep, we got it back there. Okay, so one thing I like to do to start with, and we'll probably come back and adjust this, is I like to give heroes in particular a min height. We're going to have some different things to deal with here because we have extra content. The other thing that we'll have to contend with, since I made that a background image, is being able to probably give this a little bit of a tint so that we can make sure that we can see the text on top. And of course, on their current site, they're using this technique of adding a text shadow, which is definitely helping. I think there must also be an additional screen on it already. And since we're using a, actually, let's come back to the screen so that we can focus on the layout. So I'm inclined to reach for grid pretty much for everything just about these days. Flex, we'll probably end up using Flex for different things, but we'll do that as a starting point for us. And it's not going to make the it's not going to make it perfectly readable, but I believe white text is going to, in some cases, be better. We might have to add that screen sooner than later so that we can see it, or we might temporarily take this out while we work on the layout part. Oops. Oh, I don't know why it gave me a, I work a lot with Nunduck, so it, for some reason, gave me the wrong style there. Okay, so as you saw though, with just grid, our min height, and this place item center, we're actually pretty close to the layout that we're looking for. We have a few different things to keep in mind though, particularly when we think about various screen sizes. So first on the list for me would be making sure that we, don't ever come completely to the edge of the screen. So we'll just do a quick padding to help resolve that. We'll keep it small for now because the text is centered, which on larger screens is going to help provide some breathing room, just given that. That said, we will go ahead and also add a text align here. And so, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things about the current site was kind of lacking heading hierarchy. And I believe that one of the reasons, what is commonly the reason a certain heading level is chosen, is because of a style attached to that. So that would be kind of if we start to modify typography. We're going to go ahead and do it, but it might involve some, kind of a cascade, if you will, of changes across the site to do that. And we can see that on this style here, which is an H2, there's a very strong style attached to that. And that might be really desirable, like for some of these other areas, like our how to get involved. So we might need a utility style to remove that. And that might exist, and I'm just not familiar with their framework to have that answer right away. The other interesting thing is thinking about our H1 styles. Does that belong in the hero, or does that belong as a global style? And that's where, looking at the site holistically, we can kind of see that for now, the H1s are always inside of the hero with the background image. But there could be templates down the road where that doesn't make as much sense. So to me, I think that typically your base typography styles, including heading elements, should be a global style. And I'm actually going to start out our style sheet with that. I also typically use SAS and use that as my organizing mechanism. So it's a little mind shift for me today to keep it all in one static vanilla site. Vitaly, what time am I going to, just so I make sure I prioritize what we can do?
So as of now, I think we still have 15 to 20 minutes,
Okay.
if that's okay with you. We could also just go ahead and, because there are plenty of questions coming in the Q&A as well, but feel free to go for another like 10, 15 or so.
Okay. We'll just get, we'll just get a few things going here. We might not completely get our hero finished out. And I'm just going to roughly guess at some sizes, and we can evaluate how we want that to work. And there must be, I'm going to go out to my larger screen actually, so we can inspect a little easier. There might be some, probably, some margin on both our H1 and the paragraph. So whereas we want our heading style to be a global, when it is specifically contained within the hero, we would like to remove any margin. And I'll just quickly mention here that one of the upcoming CSS features that I am super excited about for modern CSS is that instead of doing something like this, we can actually use a new selector called is. And rather than separating these out, we can write it as a comma separated list inside is. And that's actually in my most recent article that happens to be for smashing. So if that's new to you, definitely check that out. There's a lot of cool pseudo classes that are available in modern CSS. We know that it's an international audience. I'm guessing there are a lot of mobile traffic, and some of the mobile browsers are not going to be quite caught up for those types of, thank you, Carie, for those types of modern enhancements quite yet. So we'll do it this way and separate them out for now. Okay, so that made a little difference in our layout here. I do want to fix this heading style, and then we'll probably move on. In particular, I'd like to look at the grid for the images for the logos. So I think that, like we talked about, we know that this is the default style. There may already be a utility class that removes that, but let's go ahead and add one. I'm trying to think what would be a good name. The thing that's coming to mind for me is unstyled, which is not probably great, or initial style or something like that. I want it to be generic enough that it's not necessarily tied to the H2, but if there are, although that said, the H2s would have something specific. So we do probably want to tie it to the H2. Interesting. Heading, maybe heading unstyled. We'll kind of see what we can do to take away that styling, which we're going to have to inspect and find out what that is. So we have, of course, our margin. Okay, so it's a before element. So in this case, so we might even, whoops, I almost tried to do it with SAS again. We can, to hide that, we'll probably just do a display none. It's a little tricky to hide before elements. And that gets us pretty much what we want. And once again, we might go ahead and add our H2 within here to remove some margin on it. So since what's interesting to me is that it looks like these are already lined up and we haven't actually given them that style. Okay, so the H2 already has an inline block appearing that way. And since we would like it to display above, let's go ahead and make that part of our unstyled to return it to a block display. Cool. So, you know, ideally what we'd want to finish out doing, of course, is handling for the background. There's still a little work to be done to address the spacing here. We'd certainly want to continue checking it across mobile, or I should say smaller viewports, and maybe making some considerations of, you know, perhaps reducing the heading size just because it's quite lengthy of character count. So there may be a point in which you want to reduce that slightly. So it's just not taking up so much of the heading portion of the page. I'm sure too, because the image that we were looking to bring in here is such a strong image, and of course, many, many faces. So there might be some kind of unique work done specifically to the homepage hero to adjust spacing of our text and attempt to not cover those faces as much, because that's what makes this image so impactful. So those are changes we'd probably continue to try to work out for that section. But given our time, let's move on. And I think we can do this section really quickly. I'm going to go ahead and attach it actually as a global style to the aside. And the reason is the aside is one of those elements that you use very sparingly because of that inherited role that it has. And if you begin to use it more, you need to be careful about making sure it has a distinct label of tech as they're navigating the page. So typically we're only going to have one, if any, per page. So that's why I'm going to go ahead and attach it as a global style. And we may find, you know, instances on other templates where we do want to have variations, and we'll just come back and add, you know, a class in that scenario. So the other consideration, though, is that if it's a repeatable layout is what we're really after, then we might make a utility that addresses the layout more than, you know, the specific element itself. But I could see this being, you know, gaining some unique styles to help it stand out maybe a little bit more. We kind of use this red background that existed as sort of a cheat code just for, again, our time here today. So I'm actually going to use Flex in this instance, and that's going to immediately allow things to line up next to each other. We'll make sure that they align centered, and we will, again, actually, since we already have this rule, removing margin, let's go ahead and add it to our paragraph as well. And then finally, so this is an interesting one. I've been doing a lot of experimenting with container queries this past week. And this exact scenario will be so amazing with container queries because we'll be able to, without worrying about device size, only worrying about the element and how much room it has, we'll be able to switch display order. So that's one thing we're going down this path. I would hit a stumbling block if we were able to continue finishing this out and making sure it works across mobile. We can add wrapping, of course. as a starting place here. But the other thing that I'm super looking forward to for Flex is having access to the gap property. But okay, so what was I trying to do? I was trying to, let's see why I brought up container queries is I'm trying to decide, and also not having gap is I'm trying to decide how to quickly give us a little space between the words and the button. So let's do this as well.
So Stephanie, just for you to know, we have like maybe 3-5 minutes left.
Okay, so we're not going to get quite as far, and something's not quite working there. I wonder if there's a extra restraint from the old style sheet. So good to know. So shall I just talk about what we were going to try to do?
Sure. Please go ahead.
So I was hoping to provide a starting layout utility for the logos, and one that could be flexible enough to be applied forward to the various card grids that we have. As I mentioned earlier, we start to run into issues with the current grid structure when the viewport size shrinks. And my likely path there would have been to bring in a CSS based grid. And with that, and we can do it extreme beginning starting point. Let's see. Otherwise, it'll be confusing if I try to talk about it. Oh, let's say layout grid. So with something like this, spelled that wrong, that's all right. We can give ourselves, with display grid, my absolute favorite trick with grid is to use it to create columns that automatically are created across the page and automatically respond based on just a small bit of definition of what those columns should do, like their min and max size specifically. And so we will give it a minimum size of 15ch and allow it to grow. And let's see what that does. So with grid applied, it has, and let's give a gap as well. And I think, oh, what did I miss, guys? Oh, I wonder if there's another style competing, or I missed something because I tried to do it too quickly, which is possible. But we can start to have a grid that, and clearly, I think something else is influencing this since it's our, since it's a list, and we already know that some other styles may be competing here. But we can start to define a grid that responds more to the content width than a more strictly defined grid that you may have used before based on things like percentages. So that's what we were hoping to do. And we would have applied a similar idea to the various sections here. We might have brought in flex in that instance, just because we may have wanted that last volunteer section to be centered, which is not as easy to do, at least without managing media queries with grid. So that's where we were trying to get to. But I will pause now for any questions we want to wrap up with.
Yes, thank you so much, Stephanie. It's always a pleasure for me to see how you would actually start when you take something that doesn't exist and then just look into how would you mark it up, and then CSS and all that. And CSS, of course, lies very close to our hearts anyway. We had a couple of questions indeed, some of them kind of mostly related to just your workflow. And one of them was around, and that's really interesting for me as well, from John Lua, I guess. Sorry if I mispronounced your name, of course. Do you ever reach out to reset CSS or normalize CSS or modernize a CSS when picking up a new project like this, or is it just gone and should be forgotten?
I use Andy Bell's Modern CSS Reset is what I use across all my projects, and I will modify it a little bit, mostly in terms of removing things that I'm not going to use. So,
Right.
Any performance boost we can get, right? So,
Yes.
but that's
of
the one I
course.
start with.
Okay. By the way, at this point, sharing the screen so we can see you a little bit larger or on screen as well. More questions we had as well from John Butterfield. How many or which relational breakpoints will you establish? How do you know? How do you plug them in? Do you have some sort of system in place of when you actually add a breakpoint?
Yeah, so that's what I was starting to say, that I'm very pro working with the browser, not against the browser, right? So and not only various device sizes, but also in consideration of user zoom, which eventually triggers a mobile layout. All those things considered, in my own work, have stopped adhering to strict viewport sizes and using methods that are what I was attempting to start to show of Jen Simmons coined the term intrinsic design, intrinsic layout. And so layout that's based more on the content and available space rather than strict grid sizes. So the viewport question, I don't have an answer. I only add it if I absolutely need it in terms of my own work. That methodology I have to switch a little bit if for a team environment, which I I understand that construct too, and the need to be able to also document some of those choices. So project dependent, but I encourage looking for opportunities to work with the browser.
Okay, makes sense. One thing that's been very interesting for me recently, because I had a project around that as well, is what is actually the, I would say, not the right way, but more established way of organizing CSS. So we've been in this, we've been moving between different methodologies for years, for almost a decade now, I think, where we used to have object-oriented CSS, then we had SMAX for a while, then we had BAM for a while, then we had IT CSS for a while, then we had Andy Bell's, or we still have Andy Bell's methodology. And can you tell me, like being on the cutting edge of CSS every single day, what do cool people, not cool people, we're all cool people, but what would be your point, your choice, or when you're being asked about methodology or how do you organize CSS, how would you approach this question, or how would you answer it?
So this is a really tricky question to answer for many, many reasons. Right now, at this moment in history, with CSS moving as fast as it is, we have container queries coming. We have actual scope potentially coming in CSS. We have this idea of layers in CSS, and all of these things are going to drastically turn on your head any ideas that you currently have about organizing CSS. So it's a very tricky question to answer. That said, again, going back to, what type of project are you building? That's and who are you building it with? Those are the questions I ask first. So on a personal level, I'm using SAS. I have a few different files I typically create in a particular way. I use them, but that changes and gets more constricted and restricted in a team environment. Again, just for ensuring that everyone can have access to documentation or, be able to come in and pick up a project, whether they're, day one or several years in. So context is always going to play into that answer.
Yep.
But yeah, look out for those new features. That's going to be
sure. But
amazing.
one thing that I kind of want to ask still is this notion of atomic CSS or Tailwind and modular atomic classes that I see kind of being used a lot at this point. It's really, really hard to find any project that doesn't have any kind of utility CSS in place, be it, again, coming from Tailwind or anything else. I'm actually wondering if anybody in the chat, do you actually use Tailwind? Or do you not use Tailwind anymore, or anything in between? That would be very interesting to hear. But I see you using them, right? And I remember first time I saw them, I was like, oh, no, never, ever, ever, ever. But now I kind of got used to them in some way. So where are we at this point? Is it cool to use atomic? I don't know if it's cool. Okay, this is always me pretending to be cool in CSS. But is it kind of, would you say it is established to use atomic CSS to some degree in every project? Gunnar is saying no with a big exclamation mark.
Yeah, I have never used Tailwind, like a utility, a purely utility framework. It was such a time constraint today. This was hard. I was trying to think about styles and naming, right? That's never gonna come out shake out very good in a short manner. But I tend to choose, you know, what can be global styles, and I think that gets lost in the utility idea. Like some things are served much better at a global scale. Some things are served much better at a utility scale. You know, once you start to create groupings of styles, it is definitely helpful to have utilities that can quickly maybe change a display property or alter padding without having to go and write a new style. So absolutely, they always are going to have a place somewhere in the system, in my view. I personally would not pick a entirely utility solution.
Okay. Well, I guess it's always a matter of the experience and what people are used to and what the organization is used to and everything that. And I think we could really kind of spend hours discussing everything around CSS, and we probably will at some point. But I think we do need to move forward here as well. So with this in mind, Stephanie, thank you so much for showing how you work. And I would love to see what you have so far being pushed to Netlify, to the GitHub repo, so we can take it over and move on with the next part. So thank you so much, Stephanie, and everyone. Please, again, not just a clap emoji. Clap emoji is like so 2017. We would need a proper sparkling emoji if we could.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Wonderful to see you, Carie, in here. So, Carie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. How are all of you? Your socks.
I think we have conversations that will change our lives forever. One of them is about closets and pads and socks, of course. But we all got together, of course, to do something interesting, to produce something interesting as a result. And I think that Carie is one of those people who is working very, 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 very hard behind the scenes, because when I just looked up, and frankly, Carie, it was the first time that I actually looked up your full biography and like the thing that you've set up on your site and all. I was seriously impressed, because many of the things that I've been using or tools that I've been kind of referring to, well, that's Carie who created them. So Carie is a creator of Accessibility Style Guide, Accessibility Talks, also the member of the Accessibility Project and 24 accessibility teams. She is working as a senior accessibility consultant and trainer at DQ Systems, and also pursuing her PhD in human-computer interaction at Iowa State University. Oh, that's a lot of stuff that you do at the same time. Plus,
I'm busy.
Yes, I could tell.
Sure.
Plus, Carie accidentally writes articles also for Smashing Magazine, which is very, very nice of her, and just does a lot of accessibility teaching, consultancy, and everything of that kind. And I also know, I have to say that it's a lot of stuff that I know, but I do have to say those things because they're very cool. Likes to travel, garden, and engage with the communities, but also visited 47 of the 50 US states and over 25 countries, and now comes the most important part, which we'll talk about a bit later. On one of the trips, she met and partied with Matthew Montgomery and his stunt double in Dublin's Temple Bar. That's a story we all will want to hear, but that's a spoiler. We'll get to that by the end of the session. For now, though, I would like everyone to encourage everyone to give a... Carie, what's your favorite emoji?
Probably one of the cats with the hearts, or any of the cats.
Okay, so
cats.
Excellent. Yes. So everyone, please give a warm cat-related, I would say, emoji, maybe bottle of milk. That would be probably acceptable as well, to Carie Fisher. And Carie, please take it away.
All right. I'm going to see if I can get this to share my screen.
Wow, a lot of cat emoji, by the way. Didn't see this coming.
Can you see my screen yet?
Not yet, I think.
All right.
Amanda. Carie, please go ahead and welcome to the stage.
Yeah, such a rookie mistake there, but definitely add that to the bingo cards if you haven't already, because I feel like you should do that, or maybe take a shot for me or something. But thank you to Joe, and thank you to Stephanie for kind of getting the ball rolling. I've got this repo that I've connected to that has some of Stephanie's changes and Joe's changes. So I pulled them in, just serving it locally with Netlify. Not a product placement ad, but I got to do that this morning with Stephanie. We were chatting back and forth about using the CLI, which I don't normally use. I use different ways to serve my sites usually. So this is kind of fun to try something new as well. So I think I pulled down all of her changes. I'll go ahead and just do another git pull just in case. Just in case. All right, and I didn't see anything new. And so you should see some of the things that are on here. Since we don't have full content that is created here, I'm going to show you, kind of probably waffle back and forth between the live site and the changes that Stephanie made to the code as well when it comes to accessibility. We need a little bit more sometimes to be doing this testing on. But taking one quick step back, I just want to let you know that what I'm working through is kind of like a process of what I would do if I was doing an assessment for a client. So typically a client would come to us, we would talk about their accessibility needs, what conformance level they want to meet at, you know, a little bit more about their users. So we would really get all of that information ahead of time. So I'm gonna just kind of assume a few things today just for this quick demo, especially since we're running short on time. I did wanna show you, and I'll just pop all these into the chat, but this is kind of where it all starts, right? So the W3C, obviously, if you know a little bit about that, it governs the whole wide world web that we love and everything in between, anything digital really. And they have this subset group that's called the Y group, so the Web Accessibility Initiative. And within that, we have an international group of really smart people, any topic. Tip of the iceberg, right, is what I know compared to everything else, and everything, this resource is really great. This is the other group. This is the group that brings you the WCAG guidelines. You can see here they're talking about the 3.0, but currently we're on 2.1 version. So the 3.0 is going to shake things up. If you're interested in learning out more about that, just check that link out. But they're the ones who bring us all the guidelines. So it's not just one person deciding, hey, this is what accessibility needs, this is how to make it accessible, but this is a whole international group of really smart people who are experts in their fields. So this is kind of where that comes from. So assuming that, right, so I've got, when I work at DQ and doing assessments, I've got this internal checklist of things that I'm looking for. But since that's proprietary information, I'm showing you this other resource, which is free and from the W3C as well. Whoops, let me grab that link a little bit better. And what this is, when I do trainings for people who are brand new to accessibility, I like to show them this one as well. Again, that's coming from that same group that I just talked about, but we have the option to filter. So when I get in here, I can, again, depending on my client's needs, or maybe even the sprint that somebody's doing, they say, okay, we're gonna just focus on everything that's visual, right? So I could come here and I'd say, okay, let's do 2.1. There's different levels down here. We'll talk about that in just a second, but I'll just choose visual design. So I'll uncheck all of that. And I've got some tag options if I wanna go there. And then we have the levels. So level A is the very minimum requirement for accessibility. We have the AA, which is the next step up, and AAA. So typically AAA is reserved for more government and any agencies that are required to have AAA, you'll definitely know that ahead of time. But it's,
Just
yeah,
a quick note from my end. Would you mind zooming in just a little bit so it might be a bit easier to read?
Sure, let's see. There you go. Does that help a little bit?
I think so, yes.
All right. Well, and take a look at the link too. Definitely go ahead and filter and do what you need to do. But I really like this, again, this resource for especially anyone that's new or doesn't have a list that they're following already internally. And it really will filter it out by the things that you need to do. for those particular things, and it'll take out the things that you don't necessarily need for that particular assessment. Keeping in mind, you know, again, this is one way to do it, and there's multiple different ways to do it, but this is kind of walking through what we would do at our organization and what I would do. So keeping that information in the back of my mind, right, what I would look at the site first, and I would do something similar to what Joe said at the very, very beginning of today, if you can remember back to that, having those conversations with the client, making sure that the things on the page are actually the things that we want to have on the page, and just kind of, you know, flushing all of that out and making sure that that is accurate representation of what they want. Because if you're going to already be going in there and making some accessibility changes, you know, there might be some functionality or visual changes that you'd make as well. Another kind of side note is that hopefully we would have that kind of conversation at that level with Joe, like we would be a teammate, you know, we'd be teams and we'd ask questions related to the different things that we need to do. Same on the level of what Stephanie's doing on the front end development side, because I think accessibility gets a really bad rap because we often have done it at the very end. And if you did anything at the very end, like, you know, security or performance, right? Some of the ones that are a little bit more on the fringe, but are definitely necessary, search engine optimization, right? You can do all of those things at the end, but it's much more difficult to do that at the end, right? It's more expensive, it's more time consuming, it's all those like negative things. So I think that's one reason why accessibility has probably had a bad rap in the past. So I'm glad to see that we're all kind of shifting and thinking differently from the beginning and integrating it on all those levels. So, you know, let's assume that all of those things happened, right? And so the next kind of concept is that we would be testing it from the different points of accessibility workflow. So I kind of think of it as kind of a trail, right? So the first step that I do after, you know, all of that conversation and piece, we've already talked about what level of conformance that we want to meet and all of that. We talk about doing first automated testing with the caveat that, you know, a big asterisk that says, you know, this is only going to catch up to X amount of time, issues on your page, depending on your page type. So the number that we throw out occasionally is around 40. I've heard 50 as well. I think 50 is pushing it, but on a site like this, it might not be pushing it too far because we don't have a lot going on this site visually or programmatically that I'm super worried about. To me, it seems like we're going to have more issues with structure and styles potentially, right? Here's multimedia that I would definitely be looking at in the back of my head as well. And so when I look at a site, again, before I do any assessment, I kind of look through, I kind of think about it. There's things that are popping out to me. Any accessibility professionals in the audience are probably seeing the same things. It's just like front-end development. There are things that you can't unsee sometimes. You just train your mind after a while. And there are things that unfortunately you always see. I'm a recovering, front-end developer very often. So that was my former life before I was focusing on accessibility and usability. So definitely some things that I'm seeing. When I look at Stephanie's page, very similar. I'm not getting the images yet. It didn't look like that one pulled down. But I am getting some of the same structure. So that kind of goes to the old site there. So first I'm going to be doing the automated testing on a site like this. And then I would be transitioning to manual testing. So that runs the gamut of like all kinds of different tools. And then AT testing. So AT testing is called assistive technology device testing. Most people I think have heard of screen readers as a possible AT device, but there are so many other AT devices out there, everything from low tech to super high tech, everything in between. There's some really cool things that are happening in the future as well with VR, XR, AR, they're all kind of grouped together. Plus, you know, all those kind of digital data visualization and accessibility as well. So there's some really exciting things. So it's definitely not boring either. But so going back to this page, because I think it's going to have a little bit more umph, what I would do for that automated test is that first low hanging fruits, right? I'm trying to get the things that are easy. I've got a lot of different tools installed to do this. I'm going to show you one that DQ has created called Axe. So I have this one installed. I'm going to make this one a little bit bigger over here. so you can see what's going on. And I'm on Chrome. I've got the Chrome browser installed. I go up to here. I choose, you can see there's a few in there. The last one, which is Axe DevTools. And if you're familiar with this tool or tools like it, what it has is it has an API running underneath. So basically a set of rules talking about, you know, what is accessible, what are we looking for, what can be automated, and kind of like, you know, what is it that a computer without human intervention can pick up from just the code. And so for this particular case, I'm going to just go ahead and scan my page. And you have to keep in mind that I would also be scanning this if I was doing a true additional, like true assessment. I would be scanning this on different stages of the page as well. So if I had any drop downs, if I had any like modals, right, anything that was different on the page or could had functionality, right, that I want to implement and then re-test. So I'd be doing this on various levels a lot of the time. So we actually use this. We use the different tool that's using the API underneath, the Axe API underneath, but it's essentially the same thing. So this is something that true professionals do use as well. So, so here we have the automated issues. It scanned my page, and then it's going to tell me some of the issues. It's going to break it down by what we have here. So almost 100% of the time, I'm going to see color contrast. It's either going to be here or it's going to be in the review issues, and I'll talk about that in a second. But we have this one, of course, color contrast. If I go here, let's go ahead and highlight so you guys can see where I am on the page. And I'll kind of blow that guy up a little bit too. There you go. Hopefully that's good. But I can like navigate through. If I press this arrow, it should follow it. Sometimes it doesn't if it's plain hard to get here. Now I'm gonna go all the way down here. Oh, it's hidden. That's why I can't find it. There you go. So once we get through the hiddens, we're probably in a menu. Yep, probably a mobile menu is my guess. Now we've got into the footer menus. So anything that is that's detecting as having color contrast. So of course, automated tools are limited. This one can only check essentially hex on hex. It can't check gradients, it can't check images, right? So we have other tools that we would use for that manual testing. So even here, it's catching this one and it's telling us this might have an issue. And sometimes that's tricky too, where I have to sit here and think, well, is that really an issue? What it's doing is, again, it's doing that hex code against the background. So my guess is if I took that image out, it probably is a white background, and that's why it's flagging that one in particular. We also have other things like alternative text. So if you're not familiar with that term, it basically, how would I describe this image to somebody who was using an AT device like a screen reader and couldn't see the image? And so this one in particular, it's flagging it as empty. So that means that these two probably have them. Or I just haven't used the arrow. There you go. So all those are empty. And so this is one of those decisions that you have to make later on down the road. It gets a little bit more complicated, but the question is does that actually need accessible text? Could you argue that that is decorative and that information is found below? Right, and so part of the accessibility challenge, I think, for a lot of organizations is that you have almost an interpretation from the person who's doing the assessment. You know, they've got all that knowledge in the background of their head. They know a lot about accessibility, but they don't necessarily know what's going on in your organization, or, you know, some of the things, the nuances, you know, that are going on internally at your company. So this could be one of those points where you have a decision to make, right, as an organization or as an individual if you're hosting your own site. So I might go to you and say, hey, there's no alternative text on this. Here are your options. So if you decide it's decorative, then with code, I'm going to say, I'm going to hide this, right? I am going to either have an ALT and alt equals null, so just empty, no spaces or anything, just null alt. Or maybe I would do something like an ARIA hidden, or I would do, you know, ARIA role equals presentation, right? There's a lot of various different ways. There's like a billion patterns and options. I did write about something like that not too long ago for smashing. It's a lot more complex than the process, the thought process than I guess I wouldn't say, not everyone can have that, you know, it's easy to learn like a a skill, like how do I use this particular framework? It's a little bit more difficult to think through all the implications of the users, the browsers, the AT devices, the robustness of the pattern, right? It gets super complex when you really think about it. So anyway, if we decide that is informative, that might be easier than deciding that we think it's decorative. So in that particular case, the easy answer here is just I would add some information into that accessible text field. So for Muhammad, I might talk about, what he looks like. I might just say, headshot of Muhammad, right? So there's a lot of different options that I could choose there as well. So this tool, this particular tool, this Axe tool and ones like it, can tell you if it has or is missing alternative text, but it can't tell you what that is. So again, that's another kind of like complication. So we won't go too far down that route, so I can keep showing you the demo. But the idea is that, maybe you would, I call, the phone call conversation. If I called you up and I said, had like a certain amount of characters to describe something, that could be a way to describe it. So there's a lot of thoughts about how best to write that alternative text, but that would take the rest of the time here. As we can see, all of our logos, the same thing. We don't have any discernible text. So what this is telling me, and if I look down here, if I scroll down here a little bit, the issue description, it's going to tell me where the issue is happening. It's going to give me the source code. I can click a button and go straight into that code as well. I won't do it just to save time. And then it's going to tell me how to resolve it, right? So this is especially important for people who are newer to accessibility and they're just like, I don't even know what to do. I don't have time for this. I just need to fix it and go live. This gives you all that kind of good information. We have this button called More Info. And if I press that, it's going to actually take me to that rule set. So that Axe score 4.1 is what we're on. It's going to tell me I'm on this rule link name. It's going to tell me even more than the tool did. I get lots of information. This is the area that I like the most. I designed this part of it because it talks about the actual people that are affected. And I really think we don't want to lose sight of that really important thing. So in this particular case, people who are blind, deafblind, or possibly have mobility issues, this might be a particular issue for them. It's going to link you to the success criteria as well. So lots and lots of information that you can get from that. All right, so I won't go through all of these, but you just suffice to say there's a lot of different options here. I know we're running a little bit slow on time here. There is now a new thing too that people do like who are new to accessibility, and it's called the guided test. So I just want to show that real quick. Let's see, it's hiding in the corner here. I blew everything up, so there we go. So the guided tests, those are called intelligent guided testing, and they're kind of in between what I would say an automatic test and a manual test would be. So if I press on the guided test, hopefully we can trigger that one. Where is it? Reset right quick. My demos. It's slow. It's having a Monday on a Tuesday. All right, it doesn't want to play. We'll see if I'll give it a second to do that, but I will talk about the needs review real quick. Again, almost 100%, I'm going to see color contrast. And what, again, that is telling me, if I look down here, that this text or this image, it might have a gradient, it might have an image in the background. It basically is saying, this is not hex on hex. And so I'm not smart enough to know if this is an actual issue or not. And so that's when the automatic or the manual tools would come into play. Go ahead and do that. We lost some of our page layer. I'm trying to do too much on this share here. So once I've done those automated testing, then again, like I said, I go on to the manual part of the testing. So I could run that on here as well. I'm going to find some different issues, but very similar. I know that Stephanie fixed a few of the structural issues, so maybe I'd have a few less in here. But we did introduce some new concepts and new pieces, so the number might not be, it might vary as well. So it just really depends on the page. I'm trying to get that one to, I might go to the real power coders instead of the meets one. There we go. Let's pop in this. You can scan part of the page as well. So, all right, so we have 109 on the live site versus 98. So some of the ones that Stephanie fixed, I believe we had some landmarks, we had some heading levels that were fixed. So that probably is where we have seen the change. So I'd have to like kind of compare and contrast to see this. And so you could run these on multiple sites as well. Let's go. See if I can get the guided testing to work on this one. All right, so I press the button for guided testing. I'm logged in, I press save. And what it's doing, it's thinking through and it's saying, okay, of all the things that we already caught that were automatic, you know, I've checked, we've done those. On top of that, we have these guided tests, which say, which need a person to like run through them, but they're kind of walking through the mind of somebody who's maybe an accessibility professional. Let's do headings. I think that's a pretty easy one. So any of the ones that are starred with a little purple star here, those are ones that it's recommending that you use. You don't have to do all of them, or if it doesn't find something, it obviously wouldn't tell you to run it. If you have no media, it's not gonna let you play that one in particular. You could, but you're not gonna find anything. So now it's checking for headings. So I'm gonna press start. And what it's doing is it's asking me, we've highlighted 22 headings that you found on your site. Do you see any that could not be headings? And I look through and all, you know, again, you can, there's some interpretation, but I would almost say that maybe that's not a heading, right? Depending on, just for the sake of the demo, let's just say, these are not headings. And so what it's going to do is select any headings that should not be headings. So I'm going to say, this one and this one. Again, we can argue later if we think that actually is a heading or not, but just for the demo, let's see, issues raised. Oh, do you see that? The heading is the same thing for all of them. It's interesting. That's a different issue. All right, so let's just choose one more just for fun. And then it says, are there any headings we miss? So it's going to highlight all the headings, and then I'm going to look through the page and I'm going to say, is there something that's missing? I'm going to say, oh, actually, let's say that this is something that I want to call a heading. So I'm going to say next, and then I'm going to field select it. And depending on where I am on the page or what I want to select, right, I can move in closer and closer. I'm going to choose that one. It's going to tell me what it's selected. I'm going to press next, and then it's going to ask me, does each heading accurately describe the content that immediately follows it? So same kind of concept, right? Top to bottom, I'm looking at everything, making sure. I did see some ones that were interesting, like this one, right? This is one that I would say, does it accurately describe? I'm going to say no, no, no. See, it's already flagged it as no because it sees that it's repetitive, right? So I'm going to go press next. And then I'm going to press finish once I decide that. And I had the automated issues, which was 109. I've now added 4 to my queue. So this is just one tool that I would use for doing kind of an assessment. One that I really like a lot too is this one by Accessibility Insights by Microsoft. The one I like the most on this one is the tabbing one. So I'll show you that one real quick. Again, let me know about time here. But the tab stops one is really interesting. So I have this installed. I ran FastPass, and I'm going just to tab stops to show you because the automated checks already happened by AxeCore. And I know that this is actually powered by AxeCore as well, so I'm not worried about that part, but I want to look at the tab stops. So I turn that one on, and I start tabbing through the site. This works better visually if you start from the top, because I kind of started somewhere in the middle. But what it's doing is it's actually looking at all the places that are active by, discoverable by my tabs, or anything that's focusable. So it's going to give me a really interesting idea about what I can activate by my keyboard alone, right? And this is a really good visual to bring back to your designer. Maybe this is a conversation Joe and Stephanie and I would have together. Like, do we really need, 100 tab stops before we get to the donate button, right? That's not the case in this particular case, but you can see already we're going through a lot of tabbing on these logos. So we might talk about whether or not on the home page that makes sense. Maybe that would happen on an additional internal page talking about those clients or those particular companies. So the other part I'm looking at here too is I'm looking for content that I think should be tappable, but it's not. And so that was one thing I'm also kind of checking as well. So we've got 84 tab stops. I think we stopped.
Carie, just for you to know, we have like maybe 3-5 minutes or so.
Sure. Well, let me do one more test real quick, or talk about one more tool, because again, depending on the page or the site, this could take hours. We have AT testing that we can't even get to, but hopefully I'll be able to talk about that again in the future. But the other one that I really like that I think everyone should use is called the color contrast checker. I'm going to pop these links in here. That's the tool somebody was asking about in particular. And the color contrast checker is one I actually really like too, and it's one of the ones that I use very often. So this is a company, TPGI, and this color contrast analyzer tool, I have it installed, so I'm going to pop it up and take it over here. And one reason why I really, really like this one, I use this a lot when I'm testing the color, like the text on top of a gradient or text on top of an image, like we saw here. The automated test can't tell you if those are accessible or not. So I would take my little dropper. I'm looking for the background color, and when I look for the background color, I'm looking for the small, like the lightest part, or the one that matches the text the most. In this particular case, we have a shadow, so I'm kind of ignoring that for this demo part. But if we didn't have that shadow, right, we would totally fail the color contrast ratios. So here it kind of tells you a little bit more about what I'm looking for. But since we know we have a shadow, I'm going to kind of come back here, see if I can grab it. You can see we pass. So in this particular case, the automated testing tool isn't intelligent enough to pick it up because it's on top of an image, it has a gradient. So I pop out this tool and I can manually test and see, like, does it actually pass or not? So in this case it does, which is really great to see. Later on we can see other ones that don't work as well, but we won't pick on the site today, that's for sure. But there's a lot of really cool ones. That's definitely like the very tip of the iceberg or what I would do, but it's kind of interesting to walk through a site from the perspective of different kinds of people with disabilities. And while that's not ever going to be the same as an actual person with that disability type going through a site, we're hoping that by following these set of rules that, again, that international community with lots of people that have these disabilities are on as well, we can make the best site that we can make, or best app that we can make for digital product based on those kind of rules and regulations. So I think of them as helpers and definitely not a negative thing. I'm very thankful for them, in fact. But I think we're probably out of time, and there's so much more I want to tell you. So follow me on Twitter or find me on LinkedIn, and we'll definitely talk some more.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Carie. It's always a pleasure listening to you and seeing you at work. It always gets me excited about accessibility as well. I think, well, there are plenty of questions we have, and I think we have a little bit of time for questions. And if you, dear attendees, have some questions, I'd be happy to bring them on as well. But there is always this conversation, and for some reason I'm being brought into this conversation very often recently. There is this plenty wave of tools that allow for automated accessibility improvements. Essentially, you just install a plugin, and it's kind of a JavaScript library that's just a button, and you click on the button, then you have increased contrast, and then you have improved tabbing, and all those things. And so it seems like people have very different opinions about this. Some people think it's a good thing because it at least gives web experiences that are not accessible something, but on the other hand, I see a lot of people saying, no, this is not proper accessibility work. So what's your take on this?
So it sounds like what you're talking about are overlays, accessibility overlays.
Yes.
So I consider them a Band-Aid fix. If you need to use them for a very short amount of time and you're actually fixing the things, that's the problem, is a lot of organizations don't take that secondary step and actually fix the HTML and fix the JavaScript and fix the styles and all of that, and do testing with users with disabilities. So I think it's a catch-22. I think people feel secure that, oh, we covered all our bases and we're not going to get lawsuits because we have this thing. But most of them are really crappy products, and I wouldn't want that as a long-term fix. Think of it as a Band-Aid. Like if you cut your arm, right, you slap on a Band-Aid. But if you're like gushing blood, if you hit an artery, right, are you going to put a Band-Aid on? No, you're going to get professional help, and you're going to restructure the whole thing and get it fixed. So depends on what your issues are. Yeah.
Yep, makes sense. Are there any particular browser extensions that you're trying that really help beyond X?
Yeah, no, so again, the API of Axe is one that I really appreciate. So it's under the hood of things like Lighthouse, the accessibility, Microsoft Accessibility Insights. There's a tool called Wave for government. There's one that's called Andy, A-N-D-I. There's a lot of different ways to kind of come at it. I think the reason why, I used Axe tools before I came to DQ, and so I have no brand loyalty when it comes to that. What I like about it is that it's an open source set of rules. Anyone can see it, anyone can contribute to it, and they have a promise of no false positives. So if they're unsure about something, or they're testing a new feature on that particular product, or feature on the API, right? We add a new role or something. They're not going to flag it as a fail. They're going to flag it as a needs review. And so then it's up to me as the individual accessibility consultant to look at it and say, oh, okay, yeah, this really is a fail, or this is not a fail. And I think I like it too, because it's diverse in the sense of you can add them to like linters, or I know people use it like BHAT and different, QA kind of platforms, right? They can integrate into the proprietary integration with their own products as well. So, and Site Improve is, I know, one that we use too at Iowa State as well. So it just really depends. We always joke that the best tool is the tool you'll actually use. So you may hate Axe, and that might be like the worst tool for you and you hate it. That's cool. Use a different tool, right? So kind of play around and see which ones you like, and you'll always find one. Yeah.
But for me, it's been such a pleasure to see, like, when Accessibility Insights came from Microsoft. It was, I think, maybe 2-3 years ago now. I was really impressed. I was seriously impressed. And I'm wondering, and I remember vividly, maybe, I know those conversations maybe 10 years ago or so, where this understanding of accessibility was very different than what it is today. I remember back then it was mostly about permanent disability state. That's it. And now we've got much broader with inclusive design, where we're actually speaking about temporary and situational disabilities and so on and so forth. But I'm still wondering at this point, so what's your take? I think we've made quite a bit of progress over the last decade or so. But speaking honestly, like looking at the web and looking at the problems, and you're looking at problems all day long, right? Accessibility-wise. How far have we come, actually?
I actually think we have made more progress than it feels like sometimes, because we are having these conversations, right? I'm seeing tech. A few years ago there was no accessibility track. I was the one out of no other sessions that talked about accessibility, and now it's like you have your own track, you have your own conferences, right? And so I think the conversation has started, so that is positive. From a tool standpoint, I would love to press a button and automate everything and be out of a job. Like, that would be awesome. That's my ultimate goal. And when I first started, we were at maybe the 20% range of catching all the errors. And now we're up to the 40 to 50, depending on, again, who you ask. So I think we have made a lot of progress.
And I think the most difficult one still, at least maybe I'm wrong, but I just want to ask nevertheless.
Yeah.
I think one of the most difficult ones is still focus traps, models, those kind of things. Oh, they can be tricky to get right.
I think so, but to me, I call the accessibility holy grail are forms. Hands down, forms, because they integrate all the things that you talk about, like color contrast, form fields, visible labels, programmatic labels, all this help
validation,
text, validation, error messages, right? And on top of all the rules that they have to already follow, they have their own set of special rules on top of that accessibility rules. So I think forms are hands down the issue. Like modals, give me a modal any day, but
okay.
unless it's a form modal.
Oh yes, true.
Yes,
there is one question in the chat I wanted to bring up, but maybe just one from my end as well. I think one of the researchers that really changed my mind significantly, and I think that this is where I understood that things have changed compared to a decade ago, was when I think somebody from the UK, they did a research about subtitles and captioning, and specifically for movies on Netflix and so on. It was very surprising to find out that the vast majority of people of any age, especially between 20 or 15, as I think they checked, 15 to 35, they would use captioning by default. So let me ask in the chat, I'm just curious. So for those of you who are still listening to us, how many of you actually always turn on captioning or subtitles whenever you watch, even in in a native language? That'll be really interesting to hear. I do that all the time because I really want to understand 100% somehow. And sometimes we have actors, like maybe some actors that speaking in a very particular accent, and it's really, really difficult to follow along. Right. So that was one thing I just wanted to note. And it wasn't really a question, but that really changed my perception of how we as a community perceive accessibility. It's just a part of good experience.
Yeah.
But we also have a question from Steve. And Steve said, and that's something that you already kind of hinted at. So how would you actually then go about reducing the number of tab selectable elements to make a browsing experience better for users?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to that conversation that we would be having with the client and Joe and that process, and really kind of fleshing out, do we need to have all of this on one page, on our homepage specifically, right? That's your landing page. And so like seeing the logos all tabbable, unless there's a specific reason, maybe I'm only going to highlight 4 or 5. Why do I need to highlight 25, right? Unless those are just visuals. Most of the time you see logos on a site and they shouldn't be tabbable. They're just visual, decorative images. Just say, hey, look at all the partners we have. But so I'd have to take a look and see the purpose of those to really understand. But I guess I would streamline it. That benefits so many people, including most of the people who are keyboard only users are sighted. Yep. So if I'm sighted and I know I want to get to the footer, I have no skip links. I have no, I have no option, let's just say, and I have to tab through 80 elements just to get to the contact form or whatever it is that I'm looking for, social media link or something. I feel like that would be wasting my time, and I want to have other options to either jump down to that directly, or maybe less click-throughs to get through, or tab-throughs, I should say. So a lot of user considerations. Really, accessibility, like you said, it just comes down to good usability.
Yeah, it is. There's also just one question that just came in a minute ago from Valentina, who seems to be specialized in chatbots. Anything around voice chatbots and accessibility?
Yeah, I mean,
resources?
There's lots of different resources. I think the trick with that is a lot of those chatbots are third party. And so any kind of third party integration, you have to see what's on the market. A lot of time there's this option of seeing their VPAT. So I forget what it stands for now that I'm talking about it, but it's basically an accessibility statement, and it says, we've done these things and we know that we're compatible at this level of accessibility. And so my first thought would be comparing those different product options, and then going from there and choosing maybe the best option that is most accessible, because you as an organization are liable for anything you host. So if I host a media player that's not accessible, that's on me. I'm part of that litigation. If I have a third-party chat bot, same concept, right? That would fall on me because I am hosting it. I can't change the product. So that means that the only recourse I have is to make the best, most informed decision that I can before I implement that product, right? And sometimes it's like one of those like, okay, there's not a lot of options. So you just pick the best one that you can. And you include that in your accessibility statement and just say, you know, hey, we're aware of some of the limitations of this product. You know, let us know if you find anything better in the future. We'll swap it out, or, you know, so that's part of that too.
Well, on mine, I'm just really, really happy to see that there's a big bunch of resources around accessibility coming up. And thank you so much for promoting the best practices as well. But before we wrap up, I do have to ask about that story, because you mentioned Matthew McConaughey, and I just want to hear that story. I think that many people here in the room would love to hear it as well.
No, I don't know if they will. No, it's actually really sad because this was before cell phones were a thing, or they were a thing, but we didn't bring them overseas. We had calling cards still. But my brother and I traveled to Ireland and England and did some touring. And we just happened to stay in Dublin the same night that he and a stunt double and some of his other crew were filming the movie Reign of Fire, which is, I've never seen. I think it's dragons and stuff. I don't know. But they were there and we were there, and then all of a sudden it was like one of those things you look up and it's like, oh my God, am I drunk or is this like happening? Like, it was totally one of those. But my brother was there. We called my mom at like 3 a.m. and told her, and that sounds really nerdy, but yeah, it was pretty cool. But he bought beers for everybody in the bar, and there was a band playing, and he bought CDs for everyone. So I still have a CD from that band, but yeah, and then we bar hopped.
So
But
with
yeah.
that in mind, dear friends attending, if you need anything from Matthew or so, this is your short line.
I wish.
No, maybe not.
wish.
Maybe not
No.
after all. Well, with this in mind, Carie, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for your insights. And I'm looking forward to hear from you, or see you very shortly. I think we have a call in 2 days, if I'm not mistaken.
I'll see you soon. Thank you
Excellent,
again.
Carie. Thank you. Bye-bye.